Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. Alexis Morgan,
Brennan.
president of the Idaho PTA.
I mean, that's something I do, yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Not to be confused with the Olympian Alex Morgan.
Which I have been.
In Guatemala, of all places.
Not in person. Like when they see me, they're like, oh, we know that.
They don't think soccer star?
No.
I thought
no.
Soccer star.
But name on a piece of paper. That's where the confusion was.
So we have some things in common that you would never guess.
Ooh, tell me. I'm excited.
So, I mean, one you might guess. We both love hiking, beautiful hikes.
Okay.
This is a great state to do it.
It is a beautiful state for that.
We also, oddly enough, love saunas.
You love the sauna?
So you are in the metaphorical hot seat today.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So
yeah.
We're going to talk all exciting things, education policy, PTA, a bunch of fun stuff.
I'm a little bit disappointed we don't get to talk about sauna time now.
Do you think we might be able to get to some sauna time here? We're going to sweat it out. All right.
Okay.
Alexis, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be here and talk about the things you want to cover.
So as president of the Idaho PTA, we got to get into what the PTA does and why that matters. And I think it's really important because it's so much more than bake sales.
Oh, yes. It's not bake sales in my mind. Like, it's just not. So the thing that I always like to start with is that the Idaho Congress of Parents and Teachers, that's our official name, started with mothers who care. As far east as Idaho Falls and as far north as Coeur d'Alene, mothers in 1905 said, we care about our kids and we care about kids in our communities, and we want to gather officially and make that an organization. And so they, in 1905, all those mothers, there were 35 mothers traveled from those areas, as far as those areas, Lewiston, Pocatello, and they came to Boise in September of 1905 and officially formed what was then known as the Idaho Congress of Mothers. And then, 10 or 15 years later, they said, hey, it's really important for dads to be a part of this picture too. And also teachers are really a valuable component of this whole. And so that's when they became known as the Idaho Congress of Parents and Teachers. And their whole purpose was to speak up on behalf of their kids on things that they were noticing. And actually, it was really interesting. Like, as I've looked through some of the archives, some of those first initial components had to do with the juvenile system.
Okay.
So anyways, that's how we started the end. So this year in 2025, we celebrate 120 years of Idaho PTA.
That's wild because that's in Idaho. That's really old.
It is. Yes.
As a state, we're really young relatively. I was reading that PTA nationally is the oldest organization of advocacy for children.
Yep. They started in 1897.
So not that far before Idaho's kicked off.
No, not. And really, the national PTA started in 1897 with two women, mothers, who were doing some stuff on the national scene. One was a Hearst. So she had access to the newspaper, the Hearst newspaper, right? And so they used that to be able to spread their message. And it really resonated with women. It was a time when women were gathering and wanted their voices to be heard on a bigger stage. And so those national women traveled around the nation. And so mothers in Idaho had heard that they were coming and they were interested in forming to raise their voice on behalf of their kids.
Wow.
It is actually really cool. I love history stuff.
And so you are currently a PhD student, but it's not in history.
It's not.
It should be because that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Exciting stuff. So the PTA nationally has a threefold mission that's kind of broke down into advocacy work for children and youth in the community, for assisting parents in school and with skills and tips to help them raise kids. And then finally, my favorite part is involvement, encouraging parental involvement in schools.
Yeah. So we know that when we're looking at education and we're looking at outcomes, one of the greatest determinants for positive outcomes for kids are when parents are involved in that process. And I also love, Superintendent Critchfield, she talks about this too. She talks about education as like a three-legged stool, where she says it's the teacher, it's the student, and it's the parent. Those are the three important components to be a part of this process. So Idaho PTA, we say, yes, we want parents. We know that they are central. They're vital to be a part of our kids' education process.
So you took my question, because the moment you said the word outcomes, I was like, oh, I'm going to plug Superintendent Critchfield because she talks about outcomes so much and how important those are. But it's parental involvement not only affects outcomes, which is nice, but we were talking before about how it's something everybody can have a conversation on. Some people pull away from education policy because it just gets a little too wonky or it gets a little heated. When it comes to conversations around involvement, it's something that we know what it's like when a parent comes to the classroom We know what it's like when you sit down and a parent says, "Okay, do you have homework? What does that look like? Let's talk." And we know it works, and it's something that everybody can kind of step up and say we can do a little bit more in.
Right. And so, that looks like a little bit differently for everyone. So,
Sure.
one of the things that I think is really important to note are that not all parents can show up in all the same ways as everyone else. So, when we have our, parents that are organizing their PTAs around the state and they're saying, we want to be involved, there's some parents who say, we can be involved in this high level. And there's other parents who are saying, put our name on the list because we care about what you're doing. But all we can do right now is be aware of what's going on or make sure that we attend this event that you're putting on. Or, yep, we'll definitely let the teacher know that we appreciate, or we'll send in this thing to help support this activity that's going on there. And I would say, like, additionally, too, part of the thing that Idaho PTA has been working on over the last 2 years, so I became president in 2023, was to say, we represent all kids in Idaho. We don't just speak up on behalf of those schools that have a PTA. We speak up on behalf of all kids in Idaho, whether there's a PTA at that school or not. So one of the things that I said was, I really care about what all parents are saying in Idaho, not just PTA parents. So last summer, I had the opportunity to travel around the state. And I went and I had friends in some of those areas that there weren't PTAs in. And then where the PTAs were, those units like gathered some of their parents. And I was able to meet with parents right where they are to find out what it is that's on their mind. Like, what are their top concerns? And so I started in Meridian. I traveled to Fruitland. I stopped in Cambridge, went all the way to Coeur d'Alene.
Wow.
I stopped in Salmon, and then I went through Rexburg and Idaho Falls, and then came back through on 84. And it was really awesome to hear from parents, and I also got to speak to a couple administrators. I talked to a school board member, and, there were 2 top things that parents had on their minds, which was technology and then also administration. And I always tell everyone, not one parent complained about a teacher,
Really?
really. And what that tells me is that at the end of the day, parents really understand that teachers are in it with them. And teachers, just like parents, we come in all different with all different, shapes and sizes and opinions and all sorts
Yeah.
of different things, that idea. So do teachers, and with different experience levels. But I don't know that and I have 4 kids, and I got 1 off in college and 2 in high school and 1 in middle school, so I've been around the block a couple of times with conversations with teachers. Some have gone really well, some have not. But never have I ever questioned that a teacher didn't care about these kids. Teachers, I do think they care. And so that was something that I really felt from parents around the state, was that they have felt that the teachers that their kids have had, by and large, care about their kids. And so when I was able to hear from those parents, that particularly that one piece on technology, but then also on administration, I was able to take that to my board and different things and different people that I know. And I was also able to take that information to Superintendent Critchfield. She and I have developed a very nice working relationship. And she cares about what parents are saying too.
Absolutely.
And so I was able to talk with her about what that administrator piece looks like for parents from that perspective, because one of the things that we're noticing are that, especially from COVID and different things, sometimes administrators are holding up their arm to parents, keeping them at arm's length. And a lot of parents are saying, no, we want to be a part of this process. These are our kids, they're our schools. And so that is something that I think some parents feel in, hey, I want to be involved in this. Like, some parents they just want to get the newsletter. Some parents want to be in the classroom. And some parents want to, help organize different events, whether it's for advocacy, education, or enrichment. And then some parents want to be aware of those policies that you spoke about, some of those different policies and curriculum decisions that are made on behalf of our kids that are kind of challenging to navigate. And that's the world that I think is the hardest to get into. When I am talking with different parents, I got a parent group in Boise right now. They've started their own nonprofit, and they're trying to work with their school board, with their district administrators. And it has been a process that has been a total roller coaster. It's up and down and kind of all around. And I think what is really important, that I have observed and all the different things that I've done, are that when someone who is in a decision-making role can have the courage to bring people to the table, regardless of what their perspectives are, and create a level of shared decision making, we can it's possible to have some really great outcomes that come from that. And I have seen that in my own experience being a school board member from the Lewiston School District, that school board really worked to create a high level of shared decision making with their community. And in the process, we're able to pass a bond in that community with a 75% approval rating.
Wow.
We don't often see that. Sorry,
No.
I've been going.
This is so good.
Sorry,
There's a lot
Brian.
going on. This is great. I love this.
Mhm.
There's a lot of statistics that can measure success for schools. You can look at go-on rates. You can look at outcomes and test scores. You can look at spending per pupil. What you're talking about here is what I would argue is one of the most important metrics for a healthy school system, and that's access to the classroom, access to administrators. And we have school systems in the United States where that's not the case. If you have an issue, to get in is you're gonna be, going through a lot of red tape, and you're gonna go through a lot of processes. I love that in Idaho, you can walk in and just have a conversation, whether it's with a school board member, an administrator, or the teacher. And I worry that sometimes parents take that for granted and that they can go and have those. And it sounds like those conversations with the parents throughout the state, they're not taking it for granted. They are getting engaged and they are having conversations.
Yeah, they are. And I would say that, like, 70% of our schools are rural. The
Mhm.
districts in our state are rural. And so, because of that, I would say 70% of our school districts do get that opportunity. But the bigger our school districts get, the harder it is to do that, where we are more remote.
Mhm.
My kids are in the West Ada School District, and I do have the luxury of knowing who the superintendent is. I can have that conversation. I, know who my board member is. But it's not necessarily easy to access that or to feel like we're a part of this community. So West Ada has to work a little differently
Yep.
to try to create that environment for parents. And I think they do. I see the different ways in which they're trying to create that atmosphere. The superintendent has a parent advisory committee, for example, where he's pulling from different parent leaders around the district to hear from them and for them to hear from him.
But as Idaho grows, it's not just our roads that get busier and our schools that get more crowded, but that these challenges become real of how does a superintendent of a school district with X number of kids manage it, and then the next year it gets bigger and bigger. Your access changes, and so these are complicated things. But shout out to Superintendent Debbie Critchfield, who I think has been one of the most transparent and open policymakers I've ever dealt with. She's always willing to come on the podcast. Maybe there's some bias there, but she's somebody that I can text anytime and say, "Hey, can you help me with this problem?" Or "I don't understand this issue. This is what I'm reading." And I think she genuinely wants to get information out, which is what we should want from education leaders.
One thing that she does a lot of things really well, let
Yep.
me be clear, but one thing that she does that I really appreciate, is that she is not afraid to say, "We have a problem here,
Yeah.
and let's address that problem." And we see this, one of the things that I really appreciate about people who are in those decision-making roles are when they say, "We've got a problem, let's address it." That doesn't mean we need to be pointing our finger at people and trying to make people feel badly about how we've gotten here. And I think technology is one of those things. Like, when I go back to that idea of, like, parents, they're concerned about technology. This is something where, Superintendent Critchfield, along with a lot of other people, are saying, "Whoa, like, we have a problem here. We kinda know actually how we got here. So now let's address this problem so that we can do something good for our kids in this space because we want to do good things for our kids."
I guess there's another thing we have in common. We're both co-president of the Debbie Critchfield Fan Association fan club.
Yes, yes.
Oh, parental involvement in schools looks a lot of different ways. You mentioned that, right?
Mhm.
When I was growing up, my dad wasn't in a place professionally where he could be bringing cupcakes to class every day. He helped with homework where possible, right? Like a good dad was very involved. But my niece in Ryrie, Idaho, had a geography project in her sixth grade class, and so she sends a message to Grandpa, who's living in Arizona for the winter, my dad, and says, "Hey, I'm doing it on Arizona. Can you help me a little bit?" And Grandpa's got the time and attention, and suddenly he sends her this big package that has all the facts and information on Arizona and gummy cacti, and the whole bit. And it was interesting to see that it's where you're at in life can change, and grandparent involvement in schools now is this whole new thing that you have people with more time and maybe a little more resources to get involved, and that's something we can tap into.
Totally. I read something once that said that one of the greatest indicators for success for children, it's actually 25% of their ability to have like a positive outcome after they're, out of high school, or their neighborhoods.
Really?
Where they're coming from is one of the very first episodes I ever did on my podcast. And what that tells me is that like our neighbors and who we're interacting with really can have a positive impact on our kids. And when you talk about grandparents, like my kids, we don't have their grandparents don't live here in the Treasure Valley, but we have some incredible neighbors that have become they want to know when our kids are performing in school, and they have given my kids opportunities to have jobs in their, around their house. So our neighbors even, some people have grandparents, they have aunts and uncles like right with them. Sometimes they're far away. And then we can have incredible neighbors too, which I just like. That's something that I do love about Idaho is that like our neighbors, they care. I have really felt that they like care about our kids. They care about, how our communities are doing. And that's something that I've really appreciated. To me, that's a value of Idaho that I've loved.
It really is, and it's different in other states, in that we still have this pioneer spirit of if your well goes dry, that's like, I gotta get there and I gotta help, right? If your crops aren't gonna be planted. And we actually have seen in parts of the state when a freeze is coming during spud harvest, people rush to go help their neighbors. And I agree. I love that about Idaho. Let's transition to technology,
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
Something you've referenced a few times. I don't know if you've read The Anxious Generation. I read that, and I can't get over the mindset of, like, what technology has done and is doing to the minds of youth. I'm right there in that age group where it's, like, middle school, the smartphone came out for me, and that was right at the point where everyone above me really didn't have to deal with it. Everyone below me, it was glued to their hand.
Hold on, I'm stopping for a second. The smartphone came out when you were in middle school?
I mean,
Oh, hello. Okay. Okay. I love this. This is great. This is so
it
fun.
became it became more popular. I got my
Okay.
first smartphone in 7th grade, 8th grade, right?
Okay.
And that was like a not everyone had one, right? And some people did, but,
I didn't have one till I was like 30.
I mean, same, same.
I love it.
But it's changed everything, and
Mhm.
what we're seeing now is the idea of pretend and play and all these things have turned into scroll, and, the saddest moment I think in my life was, like, watching nieces and nephews, like, do, like, get ready with me videos instead of, like, play with Barbies. I'm like, "What are we doing?" And it's changed Christmas lists and all that. Technology has done such amazing things in the classroom, but we're also seeing that it's drastically rewiring children's minds. Talk a little bit about PTA perspective, mom perspective. What do we do when it comes to technology?
Yeah, so I will say 2 things first. I love The Anxious Generation. I did a whole, like, podcast on it. I think I did, like, the longest book review ever on The Anxious Generation because I love that book so
Okay, we
much.
need to link that up to this one because we're all gonna wanna catch up on your book review there. That's
Okay.
great.
But I will say that, like, just in terms of, like, what I'm hearing from them
Mhm,
are that just like, Dr. Jonathan Haidt says in his book, that if my one kid out of 10 goes to school and comes home and is like, "Mom, I'm the only one that doesn't have this thing." That's hard for that one kid. Now, that's not to say that it's good for kids to go through hard things. Full stop. I'm gonna say that. It's good for them to go through hard things. Also, kids don't wanna feel alone, and it's hard to feel alone. So, one thing that I'm noticing are that more and more parents are having these conversations and they're saying, what can we do to support not just our kid, but other kids or other parents who are noticing these things? How can we create spaces for our kids where they're playing and where they're not on technology? That's one thing that we're noticing. And in that, with that, it comes in his book, in The Anxious Generation, talks about the decline of the play based childhood
mhm.
and the rise of the phone based childhood. And what's really important to note because of that, it's not that people are saying technology is bad. They're saying we need to be really thoughtful about how we're integrating it into our lives. So, when we're looking at cell phones, for example, we know that there's a lot of districts around the state who are creating cell phone policies. And most parents, I would say, are really happy about that. Parents who are not are ones that are concerned about their kids' safety. But when people have conversations with those parents about their safety, because they're really worried about like when that if there is an issue at a school, they want to be able to get a hold of their kid, right? So, but when law enforcement kind of addresses that that actually is counter to a kid being safe, then a lot of those parents go, oh, okay, I see what you're saying here. And I can see that the school district has a plan in place to keep my kids safe in line with, our local police department. So, When parents kind of understand that component, they're saying, "Yes, we like the no cell phone policy." Well, not all districts have adopted that no cell phone policy. So there's parents around the state who are saying, "Hey, my school district, we want a district-wide cell phone policy." And so with that, the other thing that they're seeing though, and teachers are starting to say, are that, okay, we have a no cell phone policy here, and kids are not able to access their cell phone during classroom, and that's super awesome. Awesome. But guess what else is a total distraction? That computer that's right in front of them
Sure.
that they are needing to use for different schools, different school assignments to, get on Microsoft Teams or Google Classrooms, whatever they're using for that. And a lot of teachers, I actually just like heard a teacher testify. She gave a presentation in front of the Senate Ed Committee. She was invited in by Senator Lent, the chairman of the Senate Ed Committee. And she talked about, as a teacher, how one of the things that she wishes are that they could close the computers more. Teachers are wanting it too. Parents are the only ones who want that. And so, a very simple anecdotal story. My daughter, when she was a junior, was a like peer tutor mentor kind of a thing. So that means that, like, as an upperclassman, she helps kids in class. Maybe she's assigned one or two kids in a class to make sure that they're staying on task. So she's as a junior, she is helping two freshmen in a speech class. And so she comes home one day and, I've kind of heard about these two students a little bit and like what her experience is like. And then she says, "Mom, it's just so annoying. These kids get distracted so bad by tech." And I looked at her and I was like, "Well, like, why do they have their cell phones in class?" And this was last school year. This wasn't like this school year. And she said, "It's not their cell phones. The teachers make them turn that in. It's the computer. They're supposed to be on there doing some research or writing some speech, and they're playing video games on that computer." And I was like, "Oof, that's rough." And what I thought was so fantastic was that as a student, she could feel the frustration. Like, I was actually really glad that she was feeling the frustration of someone getting distracted from the thing that they were supposed to be doing that she's supposed to be helping with. Like, that's a really great thing for her to experience. But also, what we're seeing is that, like, computers are distracting kids from their because there's just so many things that are distracting on that computer. So that's something that, like, I know I've kind of meandered a little bit, but it is what I know for parents is that it's important for us to have those intentional conversations. Like, my 12-year-old, when she goes over to her friend's house, it's like that parent knows, like, it's not tech time. It's time to hang out. It's time to bake and play outside. We need our kids having those things. So parents are starting to have those conversations, and they're starting to speak up to teachers more to say, when my kid gets free time, I don't want them on a computer. And if parents, particularly in middle school, if they're not saying, or excuse me, in elementary school, if they're not saying that to their teachers, teachers have a lot of things going on. They're managing a lot of different things in the classroom. And so some parents are hearing about how their kids are playing video games or maybe watching a cartoon while they're in school. And parents are going, I don't want that. They need to make sure that they're saying something to the teacher so that they can get on the same page for that.
Yeah, I mean, love the story, particularly what an aha moment for you and your daughter.
Yeah.
Like, "Told you so," right?
Yeah.
Like, not exactly, but kinda like the
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, I just got back from the largest education conference, technology education conference in the world. There's 40,000 attendees in London, and it was fantastic to see innovation in technology, right? So as you go through these booths, the largest companies in the world, what Google's doing with Gemini, Apple and their apps to proctor cheating, the idea that you can click this app and it keeps students from being able to look at other screens or pull anything else up, and the innovation's unreal, particularly AI in math, the idea that you can work on a math problem, take a picture of it, and AI will walk through with your handwriting and be able to say, "Here's where you kinda went wrong, you could do this different." Such great things. But one thing that was just a common factor with all these massive companies that have done some really cool things is they all related back to, like, the human factor cannot be removed. And so they preach to the extent of, like, don't remove the human from the experience, and so, at times, I think we may be too quick to resist some of the innovations in the classroom that will allow us to keep up globally. If students in school don't understand how to use AI reasonably, we're gonna fall behind. But at the same time, we're gonna be even more behind if we use it so well that we remove the human piece, and I think that's what you were alluding to, and it's so important that parental involvement can mean not just what you're talking about with digital advocacy of when you want your kid using it and not, but there's some very serious privacy conversations that parents need to have with teachers because guess what? If you stick your child's third grade essay into ChatGPT, that is proprietary, right? Like that is especially with names and everything. Like students' data and students' information is for too long has just been thrown out there. That's another, I think, important conversations for parents and teachers and administrators to have is what am I okay about my student being published? And there's some really interesting laws that we got to get on, but I digress. Parental
No,
involvement is important.
it totally is, and I wanna throw this thing out there because this is something that I've heard and we hear a lot, is this idea that, like, if we don't teach our kids these things, they're going to fall behind, and I'm just going to offer this perspective that, I read in a book, and I've been reading a little bit about schools in Finland, and one of the things that the Finnish school does, and they have very incredible outcomes, and their students are really excelling, in their programs and then afterwards. Now, Finland's very different from the United States, so I'm not saying that it's the same. But one of the things that Finland does in their younger years, in those elementary years, are they make school fun. Kids are playing and they're having a good time. And one of the things that I note when I talk to people, and it even came up in this conversation, I didn't have a smartphone until I was 30. I didn't have my own computer until I went to college. Our brains are really able to pick up on a lot of things pretty quickly. And so I think it is a bit of a almost like a fallacy for us to say, hey, if we don't expose our kids to these things when they're young and teach them how to do it, then they're not going to have they're going to fall behind. I don't think that's true. I think that when we allow kids to play, when we teach them how to use their brain, when we teach them how to use things appropriately and involve that incredible innovation that we have at the appropriate times in the appropriate ways, then they're going to be able to do incredible things as they grow. The most important thing for kids to have, and for humans too, is connection.
Yeah.
And we don't get that in technology. We get that when the computer's closed, the phone is down, and we can have conversations face to face with each other, when kids can have conversations with their teachers and share their ideas, when they can connect over agreements and disagreements, when they can do project-based learning together, when they can go out and volunteer and be a part of their community. Um, for me, I just want to make sure that technology and innovation with technology is not something that pulls and distracts from the human
Mhm.
experience, because our kids are not a part of an experiment. They are children, and we know what works when it comes to helping our kids learn and grow, and incorporating all this technology, just as Dr. Jonathan Haidt talked about, has an impact on the type of people that they become. So I did just wanna throw that in there,
No, so
sorry.
Alexis, you're telling me that it's kind of this fear-based mindset to say, "Well, if I don't start giving my kid all of these things, we're really putting the cart before the horse." And so there's a right time and a right place to introduce things, but we should never operate from a place of, if they don't have this, then they'll fall behind. I mean, it's what I said, but
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, not it can't be a fe like, it can't be a fear-based thing. And just even in my own life lately, like, as some stuff has been going on and I can sense the fear, I just think like, "No, I'm not gonna make decisions based on fear." Like, that's not what works. It doesn't we don't have the best I don't have the best outcomes when that happens for me, and our kids don't either.
Well, that drives anxiety,
Mhm.
and it really, on face value, it's FOMO. It's the fear of missing out.
It's a fear of missing out, and I actually read this thing that talked it's called The Joy of Missing Out, and how, like, wonderful it is when we don't get to participate in these things, and looking to see kind of the other side of that picture, and that's really what social media does. It creates a lot of FOMO, and it creates this image that, like, all these incredible things are going on, but they're not happening to us, and the reality is, like, that's just not true, and so it's important for us, like, I mean, I just had, Dr. Megan Smith, who's
Mm.
a professor at Boise State, on my podcast, and she has this nonprofit called Communities for Youth. And she talks about how one of the things that she talks about is that, like, when we're trying to create the best communities for our youth, a lot of times what we see are that we as a society just do a lot of reactionary things. Like, think something pops up and, like, we're whack-a-moling it all the
Sure.
time. Like, "Oh, this issue's popped up. Let's whack, 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 whack." And she talks about, like, she really kind of focuses on upstream prevention. It's a great conversation. But ultimately, like, the most important thing, and I hear this a lot from people, is that connection is the most important thing. And we don't get that meaningful human in-person connection on technology. Like, I'm just saying.
Yeah, our big fan, super fan Laura, she said her favorite part of this podcast is whenever people say that, like, call me out and say I'm wrong on something. So you just made a huge fan of her because she's just like, finally, somebody called out Brennan.
Oh,
Love
that's
the
funny.
correction. Love
That's
what you're
funny.
bringing.
Just a different perspective.
I know, and that's why we do this.
Yeah.
We need to talk about policy.
Okay.
The one
Okay.
thing we've kind of talked around a little bit, at least public policy. So the PTA does play a role in advocacy when it comes to governance and policymakers. And as always, there's lots of issues that come to the table. We have a governor who many people have referred to as like the education governor. He cares about education. He talks a lot about education, something that's very important to him. And the lens in which he makes decisions is this decision going to help my kids and grandkids be able to stay in Idaho and flourish in Idaho? Which I love that framework. He may make decisions that we don't think do that and we disagree, but I think that context, that framework matters and is
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about what you see from the PTA perspective on education policy in Idaho. I like the idea of this is what we're doing well, and this is where we're killing it, but also not all things are Pollyanna. Like we've got some areas to improve on.
Yeah. So, we want to make sure at Idaho PTA that we are not like this political entity because we're not. We're nonpartisan, and also that We're really careful about what we step into. So, one of the things that it's really important to us is to make sure that people are informed when it comes to policy. So we've done two different things. One, we have a resource called Voter Voice, where people can go to our website and you kind of click around just a smidge, and you'll find this Voter Voice feature, and you can type in your zip code and then your address, and it will populate who all of your legislators are from the national all the way down to the local, which is great because a lot of people don't know who they
Mhm.
are, right? And you can send them an email right there about it. And so that's a really important thing for us to provide that for people. And it's free. It's a resource. Anyone can go on the website
One more
right
time,
now.
what's it called?
It's called Voter Voice.
Right on the PTA's website, Idaho PTA's
Yeah,
website.
you go to Idaho PTA, and I think it's like under programs,
Perfect.
and you go there. The other thing that we've done is that we are currently sponsoring the Ranch podcast in our space, in our office in downtown Boise, because he is here. The host, Matt Todd, is here in Boise, and he is interviewing just so many people at the Capitol who are bringing forward different legislation so that people can get real time on what is happening there. And it's really important for us as the PTA to say we want an informed and educated public. And so that's something that we're doing to be a part of that process. The other thing that I will say is that Idaho PTA, one of our main one of the things that we really stand for is public education. And so, what's important to note in Idaho is that we already have 9 different school choice options. I actually have a podcast all about it. And so that people can see, and even Governor Little said that, we have school choice options. And so, one thing that, is really important to me and to our association is to make sure that people understand what's being presented to them. We
Mhm.
generally we're never going to tell you how to think. We might tell you what our position is on something. But for school choice, we say that, you know what, we love that people have choice. And in Idaho, you've got 9 different choices. And one of those is a private school choice, which we think is great. If that's the best option for you, we want you to go for it. I will say that we had to pull, our 12th grader, I mean, not 12th grader, our 12-year-old is in a private school right now, because that is the best option for her. It's a small classroom experience, and it's exactly what she needs right now because for her, she needs less technology and she needs more project-based learning and fun in the classroom. And that's what's going to provide it for her. And I love that Idaho has that opportunity for my family to be able to do that. And there was a period of time where we had to, right after COVID, we pulled her for 2 days, 2 out of the 5 days when she was in elementary school for more of a homeschool setting. We did a hybrid, and I was just so great. I was so grateful as a mom that Idaho had that option for me. In doing that, Idaho PTA, we are very fiscally responsible, and we really care about making sure that choices that our government leaders are making are also fiscally responsible choices. And and we are grateful for the rules that govern how public dollars are used, and that people who use public dollars need to be held accountable for that. And so when we're looking at these they're touted as school choice, but really they're voucher options that are coming out. A voucher system is any type of money that's going to pull from a public fund and give it to a private entity like a private school, and that kids who go to public school are not eligible for those funds. So that's what a voucher is. So tax credit, educational savings account, those are all types of vouchers. So we basically say that, like, listen, if we're going to pull from public funds and we're going to give to a private entity, that one isn't like, we're not even playing apples to apples here when we're saying we're going to give to a private school, but that's not a they don't have any requirements for those dollars, whereas we know public schools do. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. But then also, when we look at data, so the Idaho Business for Education just brought in Dr. Josh Cowan from Michigan a couple weeks ago, and they presented at their, what was it called, Legislative Academy. So this is a guy who's been focusing on vouchers for 20 years.
Wow.
He studied vouchers for 20 years. And he basically has said not one state that has ever integrated vouchers has ever stuck with that cap. Like when they say, oh, we're only going to designate $50 million. No, it always goes up. And he also talks about like how vouchers are really geared towards a specific population. So when especially lawmakers come out and say, hey, we really care about this low socioeconomic group and we want to be able to give them opportunities. And so we want to provide this voucher system to them. Data shows that's not actually what happens. Data shows that voucher systems are just going to support kids who are already in private schools and those families who are on that higher socioeconomic ladder who can already afford it in most cases. So listening to him was just like really insightful. I really appreciate people who are going to bring their data information to us. And that was at the Capitol. And I saw a lot of lawmakers there, which told me we have lawmakers in Idaho who want to be informed on these issues. So we really care about that. And so at the end of the day, the idea of pulling public funds to give to a private entity where there are no stipulations for that, we don't support those types of things. And Governor Little himself said that he did create a line item.
Mm.
This is common. We know it's common knowledge. We know that he created a $50 line item, kind of opened the door for it. But he did put some parameters around that, which are fair, accountable, responsible, and transparent. And just recently, the Senate Ed Committee, when Senator Lent actually just introduced a bill regarding the Empowering Parents Grant, and he is proposing to add a $20 million to that so that parents can pull from that for private schools. And there's lots of different components in that, and it is being given a hearing.
Mhm.
So it's becoming a bill. And one lawmaker who is a Democrat, and our Democrats really are not supporting our vouchers. They're coming out straight out saying no. But she did vote for it to have a hearing. And the reason she said that was because Governor Little said, listen, these things have to be fair, accountable, responsible, and transparent. We need those four things. And she said what he did in that moment was to he signaled to the legislature, we need to determine what that is. And in order for us to determine what that is, we need to have a conversation about it. So she said, I'm voting not because I support this voucher idea. I'm voting for it because we need to have this conversation right now in regards to what our governor has signaled to us. And I really appreciated what she said there, and that, we need to have these conversations. And there's a lot of lawmakers in the Capitol who are saying we need to have conversations around public education. Are all of these policies, all of these tests that we require for our public schools, are they really helping outcomes? And I think that's from my perspective, those conversations are going to start happening. And we're glad at Idaho PTA that they're going to be having those conversations because we do want what is best for our Idaho kids.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer. More communication is always better than less. But we're on a tipping edge right now. If you oppose vouchers or ESAs, now is your time. If you support vouchers and ESAs, now is your time. Like this is where it's come to center stage. And I think more impactful, certainly than years past, and probably in years future. These types of conversations and decisions that are going to be made in the next few weeks and months will impact financial policy, particularly education financial policy, for decades to come. So I appreciated your perspective on that. That was good context, and we'll send our listeners to your podcast to listen for more information on that. You mentioned the ranch before. Big fan of the ranch.
Yeah.
Love them. We're gonna have your host on and kinda do, like, a little swap at some point and
Oh, yeah,
do it back
Matt's
and forth.
great.
That is
Matt's
fantastic.
fantastic. He's got a lot of good he's had, the Idaho School Boards Association deputy, chief come in, Quinn Perry, she's come in to talk about vouchers, she and I at this moment, I can't remember all the people that he had a conversation with Senator Lent
Mhm.
in regarding, the Empowering Parents bill that he's brought forward. So, a lot of people from both sides of the table have been able to come in. Senator Den Hartog went on to talk about her perspective of the bill that she is bringing, with Representative Wendy Horman in. So, I really appreciate the legislators who are willing to make themselves available for conversation regarding the, legislation that they're bringing forward. And I would say that, like, the resource on Idaho PTA's website, Voter Voice, to your point, it's so important for people to speak up now. If you have a feeling about this or if you have a perspective, reach out to your lawmaker. That is so important to do right now.
People always the general public constituents always kinda say, "Does it make a difference when I reach out to my lawmaker?" And it's absolutely because they if you're not in the room and you're not being heard and you're not at the table, then you can't be heard, you can't be seen. Like, if it's all they have to go on is what they hear, and whether that's from important, thought makers and advocacy groups, which have a role in all public policy conversations, but most importantly, their constituents.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, if you reach out to them and you feel like they're not listening to you or they're not making themselves available, then don't vote for them next time.
Yeah.
Because we want people in there who are going to, those are the type of people that I want to be representing me, are people who are going to listen to their patrons, like the people that voted them in.
I will say, like, the worst line that a constituent can use is, "If you don't do this, I'm gonna kick you out of office." The best line a constituent can use after they've seen their policymaker not do what they hope they would do is actually support the person that's running against them who does match or run themselves, or, like, and in Idaho, we did talk about parental involvement, and running for school board is a way that a parent can get involved, and while that seems big and scary and most people can't and shouldn't do that, for some, that's the right way to get involved. That's their way of bringing cupcakes to the classroom, if you will.
Yep.
But also, as you mentioned before, bonds show up on elections and getting educated about those. Talk a little bit about what you were able to do because not all bonds should be passed. When you talk about fiscal policy and what's important, some of them probably shouldn't be, but there's a lot of them that don't get passed that it's probably to the detriment of those teachers, the students, and the local economy as a whole. You got one passed, as you mentioned, 75% approval rating. Why was that so much different than what we've seen, particularly in like some of the East Idaho bonds?
I would say that in Lewiston, Lewiston had several failed attempts. They had 3 failed attempts before the one that was run in 2017. So one of the things that they did there when they go back and they say, okay, that very first one, I don't know, like in 2005 or something, if that's their marker, right? That school board at that time presented to the community a brand new high school, and it was like the Taj Mahal. And the majority of the public said, no, we're not going to support that. That doesn't really represent the values of Lewiston. And so then they went a second and a third time, and at that time, the second and third time, they had an opposition group actively working against them, which made it really challenging. But one of the things that the board did was they heard their community after the third time. The third time, it was like, I think they had like 51% or something like that. And they said, okay, community, we can see that our high school is deteriorating, but what we hear are that a lot of you are saying you should just renovate it. Renovate what you have. And so what the school board did was they said, you know what? We're going to pursue both courses of action. We're going to look into how much would it cost to build a new high school and how much would it cost to renovate our current high school. And so they were they really dove into that. They were extremely transparent with the community, and they involved the community in the understanding the different moving components of that, of hearing what was important to them, and also allowing them to be shared decision makers in that process. So when they brought that fourth attempt, and I was on the board at that time when they brought that fourth attempt forward, I will note that the person that, had been on the board before me, he resigned because he was sick, and so then there were a few of us that applied, and I got appointed for that 1 year, and then I ran again after that, was that when he got on the board, he was a part of the opposition. He didn't want a brand new school board and or excuse me, a brand new high school. And there I think that that was a little nerve-wracking for the board at the time, but that board really included him in the process and listened to his perspective, and as they learned together, it was really significant. I was there the day that the school board made the recommendation to bring the bond for a brand new high school, and that individual on the board who had been in opposition of that was the one who made the motion to build a new high school and to bring that, forward to the community. And what that tells me is that what Lewiston did was listen to the people who didn't want it, allowed them to be a part of that decision-making process, and then was very transparent with their community as they came forward with different like, from one step to the next to the next. And so one place and so it was incredible. I loved being like, I can still remember that night when all the numbers were coming in, we were all in this big, huge room together. It was a big, huge party, that the after party, and I can still see my superintendent jumping up and down. I was, like, jumping like, we were just all, like, so excited. But I will say that Salmon School District, that's what they did. I was able to speak with the woman who ran their community campaign, and I will say that was the other thing that Lewiston had was an incredible group of volunteers who ran a community campaign to say yes for Lewiston. So Salmon School District had a very similar situation, but they hadn't passed a bond since 1975. And so just one, I think they had like 13 or 14 failed attempts. So, they passed their bond in May of 2024. And so 18 months prior, their board had gone to community members to say, you know what, like we can see that we need something. The community keeps saying no, we're not quite sure how to address this. And as they went through conversation, they realized we really need a new, I think it was an elementary school building. And so this mom, who's a volunteer in the community, she said, I will help run this campaign. And that community group worked for 18 months with their community to help them understand what was going on, to receive feedback. And what the community told Salmon School District was, we can only support a $20 million bond. If you run something more than that, we're going to have to say no, but we can support a 20 mil. So they ran it and they did pass it, a 20 million. And so right now, it was interesting as she talked to me, they were very excited, but she said that actually isn't quite enough to cover those costs yet. She said, we're still having to do some fundraising. And then also right now, Representative Galaviz and Representative Furness are running, they just introduced a bill to be able for some of our rural school districts to tap into some funds that are available that are outside that House Bill 521 plant facility bill. And so like that community was working together for the community and the school district, that school board, and then understanding what the community values are, right? And including them in that process. And the school district, the school board listened to their community when the community said, we can support it, but only 20 mil. You've got to make it work. And they are. And it's incredible. I love seeing that. It's so awesome.
And that was a fantastic story because that is the beauty personified of Idaho, of the idea that people that have their own lives and their own problems and everything going on are willing to take the time and attention to make their community better. And it's not going to increase their bank account, and it's not going to give them any kind of prestigious title or anything. And that's what I love is people who are willing to just step up and say, I'm going to try and do my part, which is exactly what you're doing as president of the PTA, as a hardworking volunteer that's involved and helping us elevate. So you've been fantastic. We're running out of time rapidly.
Yeah,
This has been a great conversation. I think it matters because whether or not you have kids in school or grandkids in school, we've all benefited from an education system.
totally.
And we all pay taxes that we want to go towards a system that's going to produce quality connection over just short-term technology. And I think we've had a great conversation today. As we kind of wrap up here, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of Idaho when it comes to education?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. You know what? I'm just going to tell you what we're doing over the next couple of months because this is one of my hopes. So, Idaho PTA is sponsoring, along with my podcast and organization, Our Kids, Our Schools, along with the You, Me, We All group in Boise, and along with some teenager group. They're called the Youth Ambassadors of Idaho, PTSA. We are putting on what we're calling the More Social, Less Media event.
Love it.
And we're hosting that in the Treasure Valley on April 26th from 10 to 2 at Eagle High School. Idaho PTA does not have any PTAs east of Shelley, Idaho. And we haven't for a really long time. They're mostly PTOs over there. And you know what? We care about our PTO parents. We value them, and we are so appreciative of what they're doing in their communities. But what's great is that we have someone on our state board who is from Idaho Falls. Her name is Jamie Braithwaite, and she is doing really great things in Idaho Falls. And she's actually the reason that I was able to get that we have this next thing coming, which is we know, like, we're doing this over in the Treasure Valley because that's where a lot of our members are. But we are actually going to be hosting a More Social, Less Media event in Idaho Falls. And the Idaho PTA is going to be sponsoring that. And I believe it's at the end of September. I think it's September 30th. They've chosen a tentative date for that. And my hope is that parents and teachers and students show up to this event that will help them understand more about technology, more about social media, more about how they can get more social with their kids, and how we can create a better community, better school communities for our kids, and just get involved in meaningful ways, but also help to be educated on how social media is impacting our kids' mental health. And so that how we, as like community members, as parents, how we can make create the best communities for our kids. So those are two events that we have coming up that my hope is that people will show up so that they can connect and learn and go out and help their local school communities.
Yeah, April 26th, Eagle High School, tentatively September 30th in Idaho Falls.
Yes.
Not bad, right?
Not bad. Pretty
Elephant never
good.
forgets.
Pretty good.
So if our listeners have enjoyed this conversation, particularly more of what you've said and less of what I've said, huge plug to your podcast. Our Kids, Our Schools, found everywhere you can find your
Found
podcast.
everywhere. Yep.
Follow on the socials. I've dug into it, and it's really good. In fact, it's almost too good to where I'm like, man, she knows what she's doing. If our listeners listen to that, don't judge me up against you because we'll fall short. Also, another plug for The Ranch, who's a fantastic podcast with a great following on this side of the state.
Yep.
And if you're liking what you're hearing, Main Street, Idaho, Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere, like, share, subscribe.
I will say that I'm the Idaho lady on social media. That's what
Oh,
on
no.
Instagram.
Okay, so on Instagram, we're following the Idaho lady.
The Idaho lady. Isn't that the best?
That's pretty good.
It cracks me up.
That's why I couldn't get it. When I was creating my Instagram and I tried to get the name the Idaho lady,
you can't have it. It's
you took it first. So I had to
it's me.
settle for, I think it's Brennan Summers on Instagram, which is not nearly as cool. You have a great Instagram too, so we encourage everyone to give it a follow. Alexis, not Alex, cooler than the Olympian. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to stop recording, then have a crazy conversation about saunas and all fun things like that. This has been fantastic. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho's students, parents, and teachers in our schools. The best is yet to come in the Gem State.
I love it. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Until next time.